Your students are coming arriving tomorrow.
Yes, exactly. We'll spend 3 days for the museum, 2.5. Yeah.
Will you be going to the Aida tonight?
Yes, together with Professor Bickel. So, are you going as well?
No, tomorrow. Unfortunately, the first one. Tomorrow. Today is a preview.
I see.
I go tomorrow.
Okay.
I think we can start because I don't.
Will you be able to see something? Yeah, you.
I will sit in
Okay.
front, so I just only present you and then I move because I want to see.
Because the names are here. So.
Signore e signori, buonasera e benvenuti alla seconda conferenza della serie che è iniziata esattamente un mese fa, è stata aperta dalla professoressa Bresciani e siamo davvero lieti questa sera di ospitare la professoressa Bickel. Dico un paio di parole in italiano circa la sua figura. Excuse me that I introduce here for a little while in Italian, but then I will switch to English as well. And la professoressa Bickel non ha bisogno di presentazioni, è ben conosciuta per la sua vasta bibliografia a tutto il pubblico egittologico e a molti interessati dell'Egitto. Ci tengo a sottolineare solo due cose importanti: è professore ordinario all'Università di Basilea e soprattutto, e di questo ci parlerà stasera, conduce e dirige la missione archeologica dell'Università di Basilea presso la Valle dei Re, missione che sta portando alla luce una serie di elementi nuovi, perché non si dedica solo alla esplorazione della valle, ma soprattutto allo studio dell'uso dei privati nella Valle dei Re. Il lavoro che ha condotto nella KV 64, che ci esporrà questa sera, ha portato alla scoperta di materiale molto interessante, soprattutto di materiale di classi sacerdotali che hanno riutilizzato, 600 anni dopo che queste tombe erano state costruite, le hanno riutilizzate utilizzandolo come delle loro sepolture. È un materiale che per noi è molto interessante perché si collega anche a quanto Ernesto Schiaparelli fece nella Valle delle Regine, trovando tombe riutilizzate con cachette successivi, e proprio in questo speriamo assieme di far partire un progetto di ricerca congiunto fra Basilea e Torino. Avevamo già accolto una bravissima studentessa della professoressa Bickel, che ora ha deciso di dedicarsi allo studio della ceramica greca, ma siamo sicuri che troveremo un secondo o una seconda candidata che si dedicherà ad analizzare il materiale scavato da Schiaparelli più di 110 anni or sono e metterlo in relazione con quanto l'Università di Basilea sta facendo. Well, pardon me for having introduced it in Italian, but I will switch to English and say that I'm very delighted, and the museum is extremely delighted to have you here as a host. Professor Bickel accepted to give us a lecture tonight, and tomorrow her students are coming, and we will spend almost 3 days in visiting our galleries. And as I briefly told you, we are also in the process of signing together a memorandum of understanding, putting research at first, research which will be conducted here in the museum, cooperating exchanges of data, what we have in our archive, in our material, and comparing that with wonderful material that you are discovering in the Valley of the Kings. So I don't want to take any more of your time. Thank you for being here, and we are all willing to listen to your lecture, Princesses, Robbers and Priests, the Unknown Side of the King's Valley.
Thank you very much for this wonderful invitation. Buonasera. I'm very sorry that my Italian is too poor and I have to speak in English. But I'm very pleased to take you to the King's Valley this evening and present you some aspects of our current research. As Dr. Greco just said, we're dealing with a rather unknown aspect of the King's Valley. This is the tombs that were not made for the pharaohs, the non-royal tombs. Let us have a first look. This is a view to the King's Valley, and the area we will be dealing with is this nice side valley. The King's Valley is, of course, known for the tombs of the pharaohs. Almost all pharaohs of the New Kingdom are buried in this place. As you can see on this little statistics, however, only 24 of the now 64 numbered tombs were made for pharaohs. So a majority was made for other people. They are the so-called other tombs, or the non-royal tombs, as I will call them, as opposed to tombs being made for pharaoh. So this is something that was well known for a long time. However, these tombs have received very little research attention. Very little research was carried out on these other tombs, and I will show you probably some reasons why they were less interesting to the early explorers of the King's Valley. So let us turn again to this side valley. It looks like this. You can see the numbers, KV, King's Valley numbers are given to many of these tombs. And so to say, the patron, the chief of this entire side valley is, of course, high up here in the cliff. It is the tomb of Thutmose III. One of the very early tombs of the King's Valley is the only royal tomb in this area. And all the others are the non-royal tombs. Here, a map from the Theban Mapping Project of all the tombs that are known, and you can see the ones that we were working, and some of them, as I will tell you, were not known to different degrees. What are the research questions that we defined when we started the project in 2008? First of all, it was our aim to get more knowledge on the social group, on the social, and as we kept finding human remains, mummies, also the biological identities of the tomb owners. The question, who was buried next to the pharaohs? Who did have the privilege to have a tomb in this very special place? A second question that wasn't well established at the beginning was the question of chronology. When were these tombs made? And as our work continued, we realized we are not dealing just with one phase. The tombs were constructed and used and closed and forgotten. We're dealing with several phases, several periods of use, and also very different purposes of use. This is what the three words in my title are alluding to: princesses, robbers, and priests. And of course, the interactions, each phase of use of these tombs in a different way interacted with what was there before. Another question that would be interesting to do research on is the architecture of these tombs, the architectural principles. There has been a lot of work already done, but it is still difficult to define whether these different types of tombs, I will show them to you, have any meaning as to social spheres, for instance. Also, whether the place, the location, the topography where a tomb is set, for instance, in relation to a royal tomb or in relation to the tomb next to it, is of any meaning. Let us start with the original period of use. When the tombs were first used, the ones that are in our area in particular, is the center of the 18th dynasty, these famous kings, Thutmose III, I mentioned already, and then his successors until Amenhotep III. And then it stops. So this roughly 1425 to 1350 is the period when the tombs were built and used. If we make a little statistics on the non-royal tombs in the King's Valley, I put in red all the tombs that are non-royal tombs and from the 18th dynasty, from the period we just defined, as opposed to the later tombs that were made for people other than pharaohs. You can see this huge difference between many non-royal tombs in the 18th dynasty and only very few in the 19th and 20th dynasty. So this phenomenon of non-royal tombs is essentially a phenomenon of the 18th dynasty, the mid-18th dynasty before the Amarna period. Let's have a quick look at the typology of tombs. There are two types of non-royal tombs that can be found in the King's Valley. The first is a type that goes down slowly with a sequence of steps and corridors and steps and corridors. One tomb that could be identified as the tomb of a queen, KV 32, Queen Tia, the mother of Thutmose IV, wife of Amenhotep II, has a tomb like this. Two other tombs, one I will just show you, we don't know whom they were made for, and then the famous tomb of Yuya and Tuyu, the parents-in-law of Amenhotep III, had a tomb of this type. The vast majority of non-royal tombs, however, are so-called shaft tombs. That means you enter the tomb via a vertical shaft, and then you get inside into either just one single chamber or several chambers. I will show examples of both types. Let us just have a quick look at one of these tombs, KV 33, that was known insofar as its existence was known before our work, but no ground plan, nothing from the interior was known. And this tomb has a very specific location. It is located, some of you might have climbed up these stairs to go to the tomb of Thutmose III. The entrance for the royal tomb is just here, and this KV 33 is immediately next to it. So it must be in a way of connection to the royal tomb, and we would very much have loved to be able to identify for whom it was made. But you hear my phrasing already, we did not find any conclusive evidence, any name of the person who might have been buried here at first. It is a tomb that is accessed through stairs, and then you get through these stairs into a vast central room. This is how we found it, filled with rubble and these big boulders above the rubble. And once it is cleared, it looked like this. And this brings me to another very important feature of this particular type of tombs, the non-royal tombs in the King's Valley. You can see, in contrast to the beautifully decorated royal tombs, in contrast to the tombs that were made for the nobles in other necropolis in the area, these non-royal tombs in the King's Valley have totally undecorated walls. Everything is blank, no decoration was made, although the carving is rather careful here. And this is something really systematic. It has nothing to do with the tombs being unfinished. It is really the systematic, one of the characteristics of these non-royal tombs in the King's Valley. They are undecorated tombs, which makes it, of course, more difficult to know for whom they were made. We can only rely on finds, on objects that might have the name of the person who was buried in these tombs. This feature of tombs, shaft tombs without decoration, is exceptional, as I mentioned. However, there is another necropolis, and as it is important to Turin, I just mention, the Valley of the Queens also has shaft tombs with undecorated walls from the 18th dynasty. And it has even twice as many, over 60 undecorated 18th dynasty shaft tombs. So this is a feature that the King's Valley and the Queen's Valley share, as opposed again to the nobles who had decorated tombs. And this is a very interesting phenomenon. There is still no really conclusive explanation of this phenomenon. Is it simply related to tradition? We don't really know. It poses a lot of questions on the ritual use of the tombs, for instance, on the identification, the memory that was not fixed on the tomb walls. It still needs more research to be better understood. But as a fact, it stands here that many non-royal tombs in the Queen's Valley are undecorated, actually all in the 18th dynasty. And then in the Ramesside period, the 19th and 20th dynasty, we have decorated corridor tombs in the Queen's Valley. And as I mentioned, we have just very few decorated corridor tombs for non-royal people in the King's Valley in the Ramesside period. These two groups are closely comparable. However, I won't go into detail here. If we look at the architecture of the Queen's Valley, it quite clearly is different from the architecture in the King's Valley. We have this interesting centrality of the shaft, which we never have in the King's Valley. You always go down and then comes a sequence of rooms. Here the rooms, the shaft is very often in the center, or the rooms are in a different shape. So there are elements that are comparable, and there are interesting differences between the two necropolis. Let's come to the King's Valley now, to the area we are working in. This is how it looked at the beginning. You can see it was very evident that there is something, this tomb we had been working on already, but you could see a depression, you could see that there is a shaft going down into the earth. And these tombs also had numbers already, so these shafts were found before. Before I come back to this area, just one short view of the end of our concession area, the area between these two tombs here. You can see it on the right. It was covered with later structures, workmen's huts, so-called workmen's huts made to accommodate the workmen who were doing the Ramesside royal tombs and who stayed for a certain period in the area. So they had their little huts, they stayed there, they worked there, they had pleasant evenings there, they produced a lot of ostraca, of limestone slabs with drawings and all sorts of things. And among this Ramesside late 19th dynasty material, we found something quite exceptional, a vertical sundial. There must be some in the museum here. Many museums have vertical sundials. It's a type of object that is relatively well known. It's a watch, it's a clock with a gnomon here, sticking in here, and then the shade shows the hours of the day. It is a type of object that is well known. However, until this find, all the objects of this type, all the vertical sundials, were thought to be of the Greco-Roman period, over 1,000 years later. And the context here is very evident. This type of measuring the time was known already in the Ramesside period. So sometimes we have preconceived ideas, and a find, clearly datable find, makes us think back to it. We don't know, of course, why people needed a watch in the King's Valley, perhaps simply to measure the time people were working, to know when it was break time, when it was change of shift, perhaps some very use-related purpose. Let's come to the area where we made the most interesting finds during the last years. These two tombs, KV40 and KV64. KV64 was not known at all. It is the last tomb that was discovered. If we look at the area as it looked in 2009 and still 2010, again you can see KV40. You can see there is something. You couldn't see at all, you couldn't guess that there was a tomb immediately next to it. We didn't expect to find any new tombs. There was so much work in the valley, and we didn't actually look for a new tomb, of course. We didn't expect a tomb also because the tombs generally have a distance of some 16-20 meters. They seem to be quite distant one from the other, and here all of a sudden two tombs so closely related, less than a meter here. We started working on KV40. It was our aim to have a look at this tomb. The existence of KV40 was known, but nothing was known from the interior, neither the architecture, nor the period, nor whatever might be inside. Now, when you start digging up a shaft, going down into the earth, you have to think protection immediately. You have to think site management. What can we do in order to prevent people to fall down, people to go down, robbers that we don't want, in order to prevent rain to fall down. It rains sometimes in Egypt also. So our aim always is to make a protective cover of the shafts quite at the start of work. And this is the moment when work was started here and clearing was done just around the tomb to set this cover. And this is the first day when all of a sudden we realized there is what at first we called a man-made feature, in order not to be too quick saying there is a new tomb, but it was a man-made feature, definitely. This find, by the way, was made on the 25th of January 2011, the day when the revolution in Egypt broke out. So it was a very difficult period, of course, and we just at first started out covering KV40, the shaft of KV40, and this man-made feature with these protective structures. And then a year later, 2012, we had the permission, and things were clearer, we had the permission to work in KV64. And indeed, working down this man-made feature, it turned into a shaft, a burial shaft, very clearly, and it became absolutely clear that we were dealing with a tomb when we found these blocking stones, big stones that obviously blocked the entrance. This was the sign we're in presence of a tomb that has not been violated, that has not been accessed since it was last used, since the last burial was carried into this tomb. And once these blocking stones were documented and removed, this is what the interior looked like. One coffin and a little object to which I will come. set. You can see it here already, not on the floor of this chamber, but on a thick layer of rubble that filled the room almost to half its height. It is a small tomb, only one room, a shaft and one room, and this coffin. The type of the coffin quite quickly made us realize we're not dealing with the 18th dynasty, from which before we had finds, and we were sure that these tombs were made in the 18th dynasty. Here we're dealing with something much younger, 500 years younger, we have heard already, a burial that was made in the 22nd dynasty in the 9th century BC. It's the coffin of a lady, very nice coffin of a rather rare type of this period. And the names of the lady who is buried here and even the name of her father are indicated on several places of the coffin. It was made for the Chantress of Amun, so a type of priestess and noble elite lady. Her name was Nehemes Bastet, and she was the daughter of a man with a priestly title, the opener of the doors of heaven, in Karnak. So a priest in Karnak, Nachdefmut, was her father. This gives us very nicely the social setting of this lady of the 9th century who was buried here. Her mummy, by the way, which you can see absolutely intact, in perfect shape. If we look again at the find situation, this undecorated tomb, of course, the only element that was given to this lady was this wooden stele. It is a type of object that we know quite well. Most museums have several wooden stele of this period. However, until now, this type of object always lacked a context, an archaeological context. People were wondering, were they used above ground? Were they used in chapels, in structures above ground, or in the tomb? And this object was clearly in the tomb. It was also clearly oriented towards the head of the lady. And we see again the image of Nehemes Bastet in front of a composite deity, a deity that has attributes both of the sun god, solar attributes, the sun and the falcon head, and attributes of a Osiris god. So we have a solar Osiris composite deity, all gods in one. The gods are also enumerated in this little prayer, which she addresses to this deity, so that these deities may provide her with food in the other world. And, this food, we have it here nicely depicted. A wonderful little object, only 27 centimeters high, and which for the first time gives an archaeological context to this type of objects. I have mentioned before, if we come back and look again on this fill of stones, this burial, the coffin and the stele were set on a thick layer of gravel, of stones. What does this mean? It is a very important means of understanding the chronology of the tomb. We have here, once the coffin went into a storeroom, a section of the fill, and on the floor there were remains of the original burial. The original 18th dynasty burial was, of course, set on the floor, and we found of this original burial only a few remains, only a few heavily looted remnants. I will come back to this in a moment. And then the archaeological situation, this refill that was made perhaps to cover these remnants of the original burial that were in a bad shape, in a quite terrible aspect, and the 22nd dynasty burial above it. From the original burial, this 18th dynasty burial that fits into the chronology of the other tombs we had looked at before, we had found the original entrance. Here were the blocking stones that I just showed you, the blocking of the younger burial, and here was the closing device of the 18th dynasty, associated with pottery from the 18th dynasty. There is one object, half a little wooden tag with the name of a princess. Unfortunately, it is impossible to say whether this name identifies the female skeleton. You can see I was speaking of looting, speaking of robbers, who in the antiquity, clearly before the tomb was filled and used a second time, looters took almost everything they could and left the skeleton, the mummy, in this very sad shape. We know that small objects came into the tomb with this refill, with all the material that was used to fill up this. And although this little tag with this princess name was found rather close to the floor, we cannot be sure whether it came in or whether it designs this princess, this lady here. Let's not call her a princess. We will speak of princesses later. What was also found in relation to the 18th dynasty burial were 2 heads of canopic jars, and was this lovely little glass flask. Glass in the 14th century was something very new, a very precious, very new material that clearly belonged into the highest elite strata. So this small little tomb with its different finds, different periods, allows us to construct the chronology, the diachrony of the King's Valley, of the different uses of these tombs. An original use, as most of the tombs, or all the tombs actually, in our concession area in the 18th dynasty. Somebody, we don't know exactly who she was, but presumably from the royal family and royal entourage in this 18th dynasty. She was buried here, certainly with a wealthy burial. This little glass flask, is just a reminder of an elite burial. But her coffin was stolen, all the other objects were stolen. And we had even remnants of cartonnage on which one can see the instruments that were used to chip off the gold. On site, the gold of her funerary mask was chipped off. So this tomb was looted in what I would call the looting and recycling phase. It's a very interesting and still quite badly understood period when officially, not by robbers, well, we would call them robbers in our perspective nowadays, but they were people sent officially to retrieve whatever could be reused as valuable material. A period also that over a century, so not just in a night, robbed all the royal tombs. The kings, the pharaohs that were robbed and that were also unwrapped, their mummies were unwrapped to the skin. The pharaohs were reburied, but not the non-royal people. Most of them were just left behind. This is what we find in several of the tombs. This is the sad state of this lady. So a period that is still very difficult to assess properly. On one side, economic need, objects, the gold, wood, all material that could be reused was retrieved from the burials. The kings were reburied, but not the other people. And then another 50 or 100 or 150 years, hard to say, later, the tombs stood empty, so to say. The political situation had again changed. The tombs were at the disposal for other people. And this is when this lady was buried here. Other peoples from these priestly families of the Amun priests of Karnak and the Theban area used several royal and non-royal tombs for their burial place. So we have this long and very different, this long phase of use of the King's Valley and the different types of uses, the different types of interactions also. Let us now look to the tomb next to it, where we will find the same chronology, the same phenomenon, but in a very different way. As I mentioned already, it is very, very strange that these tombs are so close one to each other. It would be very interesting to know whether they were in some relation. The Egyptology can't tell us, the texts don't tell us who this lady was, who she was perhaps in relation to the people buried here. Perhaps anthropology will tell us one day. As you can see, KV40 is a big tomb with a shaft, a corridor, and then 4 large rooms, a central room, and 3 side rooms. And once again, this is how it looked when we started the work. You could see that there was a tomb. It already had a number, but it was entirely unknown. This again is the shaft where you go down, a shaft of something more than 6 meters. The ground plan. And once we came to this area, the 4 rooms here, the central room and the 3 side rooms, all looked like this. They have totally black walls. Obviously, a very heavy fire has destroyed everything after this incredible mess of finds was produced by robbers. Everything was smashed to small pieces. Everything valuable, of course, was gone. Much of the coffins was gone or smashed into pieces. Mummies were unwrapped. There's mummy wrappings, there are bones, there's a lot of pottery, there is a lot of cartonnage. A total mess that was burnt at the end. The last looting and the fire we can almost certainly set to the modern period, to the end of the 19th or even very early 20th century. This is one impression, just how things looked. The mummies, although they were beautiful mummies, were torn into pieces by the modern robbers. This is a first set of documentation we did to position the major pieces. And another view of this totally blackened interior. The fire must have become very quickly very hot. This is why the roof the limestone roof is totally burned, and then it was probably quenched. It was when the shaft was filled, the fire did not get oxygen anymore, so the fire quenched, the fire stopped. This is why still wood and textiles is preserved in quite a large amount. There are objects that give us a chronological frame for the original use of the tomb. All inscribed objects point to the period of Amenhotep III, either with his name, as in those seal impressions, or with the name of Thutmose IV, characterized as deceased. So we're somewhere in the reign of Amenhotep III for the original use of the tomb. And we are now in the process of analyzing all this material, analyzing several thousands of cartonnage fragments, several thousands of wooden fragments. Many of them have to be restored first. With patience, some nice objects can be restored, like this very thin cartonnage. Looking at the fragments, it was clear from the beginning that we also have these two periods of occupation. 18th dynasty, period of Amenhotep III, is the original period of burials, and then certainly the tomb was looted also. And in the later period, in the 22nd dynasty, again, the tomb was used by several individuals. We're still in the process of analyzing, our anthropologists are still in the process of analyzing the human remains, but they're now certain that we're dealing with some 60 individuals. 60 people from these two periods were buried in here. I will come back to these numbers in a second. This is one of the nicer finds. This is one of the more spectacular finds. At least we like it very much, and we're very happy to work with a specialized textile restorer who was able to build up this pharaonic sock, probably an 18th dynasty sock made to be worn with sandals, here made in a very elaborate sewing technique. And it's a very rare type of object. Socks are known mostly from the Coptic period. One group of objects we've been working with, and which, quite to our surprise, brought a lot of results, was the pottery. Here you can see all the pottery from KV40 laid out. Everything, as you saw before, totally broken and smashed, but everything with patience can be reconstructed, rebuilt. Very painstaking, very long work, which our Egyptian colleagues do, and they end up mending huge jars. And as you can see already here, the surprise is that these jars were inscribed. These jars, we're dealing with over 100 of these big jars, between 100 and 120, were almost certainly used to store refuse remains of the mummification process and natron. We have thousands of tiny little bags of natron, linen bags, filled with a little bit of natron, this salt that was used in the mummification process. That was perhaps also given as a token of purity, of cleanness of the mummy for eternity. So these jars, you can see another inscription here, were given to the deceased and certainly contained what belonged to the mummification process or what was given later. And as I mentioned, the surprise comes from these inscriptions. These inscriptions, all, whenever a jar is inscribed, it mentions a name presumably of one of the individuals buried in the tomb. And these names, that's another surprise, the majority of these names are preceded by the title King's Daughter. So all of a sudden, knowing that we're in the chronological surroundings of the reign of Amenhotep III, all of a sudden his family grows quite significantly, and we find a lot of royal daughters and some royal sons that were so far unknown. Like this Neferunebu, king's daughter Neferunebu, with the precision from the house of the royal children. Another one called Nefertari, like the famous queen much later, king's daughter Nefertari, from the house of the royal children. There is also a special type of royal daughters, like this Taemwajes. She is king's daughter, Taemwajes, the one of the royal son. So this is a clear way of indicating that this Taemwajes is actually a royal granddaughter. She's the king's granddaughter. She's the daughter of the royal son. A way of designing royal granddaughters that is well known from other sources. So royal daughters and one royal granddaughter. Several royal kings also. This king's son Mertawi, with this intriguing feature which we still can't explain, why all of a sudden yellow ink is used between and even over the inscriptions. Phenomenon we'll have to investigate further, but we have it in many instances. Another group of women without titles, quite a large group, as I will show you. Women where we have just the name, Tachuya, for instance. Huge jars, and this Tachuya has even seven so far, large jars like this. And yet another group of individuals, females again, women with foreign names, like this Antibenet, called after a Levantine Near Eastern goddess Anat. Anat is beautiful. Other female names designed as foreign names. There is a hieroglyph that specifies she is a foreigner. Names from the Near East and names from Nubia. So what were these women from foreign countries, either the South, Nubia, or the Near East? What was their role in this context of royal daughters and royal sons and other ladies? We do not know for sure, of course, but there is one document that can make us think of a possible relation, and it comes also from the time of Amenhotep III. It's one set of these large commemorative scarabs. Amenhotep III had several groups of large scarabs issued where he proclaimed important events of his reign. And one is this: it is made to let people know that he received a wonder, as he calls it, that he received for marriage the daughter of the chief, the ruler of Mitanni. A wonder that was brought to His Majesty, the daughter of the ruler of Mitanni. This is a kingdom in the north of current Syria. Shortana is the name of the ruler, and the lady is called Giluhepa. She was given as a token of good relations, as a diplomatic gift, so to say, to Pharaoh Amenhotep III. And as the text goes on saying, she came together with the choicest of her harem, her female entourage, 317 women. So this one princess who was sent from Mitanni to Egypt. This one diplomatic marriage, she came with 317 women. Giluhepa certainly continued her life somewhere in the palace next to the king. Where did these 317 other women from the Levant continue their life? We don't know, of course, none of them is known through other documents, but it is very well possible that they also continued to live in these huge palace structures, in this large entourage of a pharaoh, together with royal daughters and princes, perhaps. So to sum up what these pottery inscriptions tell us, and once again, it's still work in process, they're still under study, they give us a total of 32 individuals, of which 26 are female, and only 4 are male, and the 4 males have the title royal sons. 2 are too broken, we can't identify the sex. So it is, KV40 is a largely female tomb, interestingly. And the women can be subdivided once again in these 3 groups. There are 12 royal daughters or granddaughters. There are 10 women without title, difficult to know what their status was in the court. And there are at least 4 women clearly with foreign names. So this is quite a significant result, that all of a sudden we get insight into this harem, into this palace entourage of the king, these female quarters, women who certainly lived together. Would be interesting to find out whether they lived in the area of Memphis or whether they lived in the area of Thebes. Women who certainly lived together from different origins and were buried together in this tomb. So this is how this very unpleasant first sight, which we got slowly through Egyptological and through anthropological work. Of course, we will be working also on relations of people, possibly, hopefully, working with ancient DNA analyses to see who was related, whether we can identify, whether we can get biological identities of these people. And for the time being, it is mainly this pottery that gives us some insight into the use, the original use of KV40. And with this, I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you so much for your wonderful lectures and fascinating overview of what is going on. And we still have some time for questions.
Please in Italian also. I understand Italian, or
se
somebody will help.
Anche in italiano.
All the remains have been analyzed in the KV
40, yeah.
All the remains have been analyzed.
We're still in the process of analyzing. Yes, it is half a half, exactly. Yes, we're midway, but we still need at least a year or 2 to work on the material.
Do you get permission to have DNA analysis, and can you do that in Egypt?
We will know in a week. We applied for permission, and we know that another mission did receive permission, so we think it will be possible, either now or in the near future. We'll see.
Just to retain your attention on the fact that you certainly know the tomb of Ha in the Medina is also a shaft tomb, just in the middle of the two valleys.
Yeah.
So they are not only in the Valley of the Kings or of the Queens, but all over the necropolis in the 18th dynasty.
Yes, my point was more on the lack of decoration, the lack of
It
chambers,
has a-
of course.
and it lacks also decoration. The
It does.
chapel
It has
is
a chapel, doesn't
The
it?
chapel is completely outside.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, yeah.
Well, then I thank you again for these wonderful lectures that give us
Thank you.
inspiration for further research, and I hope for cooperation together. And especially, I found it very interesting the way you showed us how a multidisciplinary approach and, well, all this wonderful information that you could get from the dockets about the original, those who occupied the tomb at the beginning, and how putting things together we can, well, you can reach into its results, and I think it will be very interesting to, well, compare to what we have
What
here
you
and see
have, of
what
course.
we can
Yeah.
do together.
Yeah.
So thank you again for
Thank you very much. Thanks.